Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist with Cooperative Farmers Elevator. And in this week's Field Friday segment, I thought I'd kind of give a little context to something we've kind of all been talking about, this dry weather pattern and this heat we've been dealing with and what's it doing to our crops. I thought it's maybe start out with a little historical context and how dry we really are. I happened to see on Twitter, here's a tweet that the National Weather Service in Sioux Falls had put out. You can see they put it out talking mainly about the significance of Sioux City. Sioux City's weather station is showing us from the 1st of April through the 1st of August that this is the driest on record, 5 inches or so of rain. You can see a lot of these other stations, they're probably looking at 130 or 140 years worth of weather data, and we're in the one of the driest 30 in most of the weather stations around the area, with some really dry patterns. So what else is more local? We've got a couple of weather stations on the Iowa State network. We've got one by Dune, just north of Dune, a couple miles. That one we've got basically 6 inches of rain since the 1st of April. We're 7.5 inches below normal. That's obviously we're less than half. The Inwood stations had a little more rain, but we're still 4.5 inches below normal. That's kind of out by the winery west of Inwood. And then we also have a station over west of Ocheyedan, and that station is kind of similar to Inwood. It's had that 9 to 10 inches of rain, but it's still 4.5 inches below normal. I know you get into Osceola and Dickinson County, it was probably more early. We had some little bit more of a struggle to get going planting in some areas over in those counties. That was when that little bit additional moisture came. But in general, we're really dry. You can also see central Iowa is a little bit of a unique area in Iowa this year. We're actually a little bit above, at average or a little bit above average for moisture. But southwest and southeast Iowa are also below normal in that 4 to 6 inches of precip for that time frame. So pretty wide area that's affected. Luckily we went into the year, we had some moisture in our subsoil. That's why we've held in there and things have looked as good as they have up to this point, but we're obviously under some stress. So what does that mean? In soybeans, we're out in the soybeans here. You see a lot of these leaves get turned upside down. You drive by in the afternoons, you see them stressed out and rolling those leaves over. Obviously that's not good. It's hard to put a number on what we're losing on beans under this heat stress and drought stress. Beans have an amazing ability to compensate if the weather does turn around in our favor. We're still putting flowers on a lot of beans, although that's starting to come to an end, so they can put a few more flowers on. They can pollinate more blossoms, they can put more pods, more 4-bean instead of 3-bean, and then once those pods start to fill, they can obviously get bigger beans if the weather is good. But if it's poor, it'll actually make smaller beans and we'll abort some. So there's a lot of things that are movable in what's determining that soybean yield, so we really can't put a number on it. But we really would like to obviously have that get better here soon so we can have a little bit better yield potential to finish our beans out. Corn is actually a little bit easier to put numbers on. It's kind of been looked at, what we're losing under stress at certain stages of growth. First off, just for a point of reference, we've proven we can raise 600 bushel corn with some of the yield contests, the top end guys. So let's start assuming that if we have everything really, really good here and we can raise 300 bushel corn, we're already losing 50% of our yield potential based on various stresses throughout the whole year and certain factors. So just for point of context, if we're going to raise 200 bushel corn, we're losing 66% to get there. So there's lots of other factors that come into play, but a lot of times the numbers come into play when we're talking about weather like this where we're dry. Anywhere from that chest high corn all the way up to about the dent stage, we're losing, in theory, if it's really bad, probably up to 5% per day, kind of a maximum, although during pollination that number actually goes up to about 9% maximum loss per day. It's got to be really, really, really bad for that number to hit, but you can say even if you lose a third of that, if you're losing 2 or 3% per day and you start stacking in here 10 to 15 to 20 days with some stress, obviously those numbers add up, and that's in amongst the other stress that we have during the year. We've all seen corn roll up, so if you want to know how much stress is that corn field under, we've all driven by fields here this last few weeks where they're rolling up in the afternoons. How long does that cornfield roll up? Is it from 2 o'clock in the afternoon till supper time, or is it already at 9 o'clock rolled up all the way till dark? You know, that's an indication. So you can kind of tell there's various differences there in how much stress is in a certain day. Is it windy? Is it hot? Is it, you know, did it get a little bit more dew in the mornings? Those kinds of things have an impact. But those are just kind of some ballpark numbers. What we're going to have for an opportunity for yield loss if this weather pattern continues. Right now, you can kind of go out and start looking at some of these fields. I went out into a plot this morning just to look at a few things, and this was a late April planted corn plot, a couple different maturities, but they always talk about when does that corn abort the kernels on the tip. Typically they'll say anywhere from the first 10 to 14 days after pollination is the only time that will abort these kernels on the tip of the ear. Once we get past that stage, which these ears are, they're past that 10 days after pollination window, then the kernels that are there are going to stay. They're not going to abort anymore. They're developed far enough. But if we end up with stress after that, we won't have the kernel depth, we won't have the amount of grain fill, that test weight, those types of things won't be as good. If we do get good weather, it'll kind of keep packing on and fill those better to try and compensate some, but that's the only thing the corn can do to adapt to that. So that's why beans can adapt a whole lot in different ways to make that compensation if the weather does improve. But that's where we're at with corn. You can go out in most fields now that were planted in a reasonable time and probably start to tell, are we going to have much of a tip back or not? And that'll be your first indication of how much yield impact we've had. You know, some of these fields of corn, especially, they're visual now. You go out into these cornfields and look for this ear tip back, you're going to probably notice some burnt up leaves on the bottom in a lot of these fields. Some nitrogen deficiency is showing up on the bottom. Earlier on we saw potash deficiency showing up again. That doesn't mean you don't have it there. But we get these topsoils so dry that those roots can't extract nutrients from that dry topsoil. It may just be that it just couldn't take it up, and that matter of fact, that is what's going on in a lot of these fields. So keep that in mind when we're looking at this stuff. We didn't lose nitrogen very likely. It's probably there. We just haven't been able to take it up, and that corn plant's trying to do this pollination and grain fill, and it's going to start to need it pretty heavily. And if it doesn't have it, it's going to suck it out of the leaves. That could have an impact on our stocks here as we go forward if we don't improve here quickly. So keep all that in mind as we get farther into fall here. So with that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.